Now Joktan, one of the sons of Heber, had those sons Ilmodad, Salpha, Ishmael, Jura, Adoram, Exil, Dekel, Ebel, Abimel, Sebius, Ophor, Yulta, and Jobab. These inhabited from Kofin and Indian River and in part of Asia adjoining to it, and this shall suffice concerning the sons of Shem. I will now entreat of the Hebrews the son of Peleg, whose father was Heber, was Ragu, whose son was Serug, to whom was born Nahor. His son was Terah, who was the father of Abraham, who accordingly was the 10th from Noah, and was born in the 292nd year after the flood. For Terah begat Abram in his 17th year. Nahor begat Haran when he was 120 years old. Nahor was born to Sherug in his 132nd year, Regu and Sherug at 130. At the same age also Peleg had Regu. Heber begat Peleg in his 134th year, he himself being begotten by Salah when he was 130 years old, whom Apharxad had for his son at the 135 year of age. Apharxad was the son of Shem and born 12 years after the flood. Now Abram had two brethren, Nahor and Haran. Of these Haran left a son, Lot, as also Sarai and Milcah his daughters, and died among the Chaldeans, and in a city of the Chaldeans called and his monument is shown to this day. These married their nieces. Nahor married Milcah, and Abram married Sarai. Now Terah, hating Chaldea on the reason of his mourning for Haran, they all removed to Haran of Mesopotamia, where Terah died and was buried when he had lived to be 205 years old. For the life of man was already by degrees diminished and become shorter than before, till the birth of Moses, after whom the term of human life was 120 years. The Most High determined it to the length that Moses happened to live. All right. Now Nahor had 8 sons by Milcah, Uz, Buz, and Chemil, Chis, Azud, Phyllis, and Jadoph, and Bethil. These were all the genuine sons of Nahor, for Teba and Gama and Takchas and Makkah were born of Remuah, his concubine, but Bethuel had a daughter, and Rebekah, and a son, and Laban. Alright, so that's pretty much it on Abram. Um, and just for extra, the destruction of the Sodomites by the Assyrian war. All right. So, and that it says at this time, when the Assyrians had the dominion over Asia, the people of Sodom were in a flourishing condition. They were growing both as to riches and the number of their youth. There were 5 kings that managed their affairs of their country: Balas, Bara, Sinbar, and Somabor, with the king of Bela. And each king led his own troops, and the Assyrians made war upon them, and dividing their army into 4 parts, fought against them. Now every part of the army had its own commander, and when the battle was joined, the Assyrians were conquerors, they were victorious, and imposed a tribute of taxes on the kings of the Sodomites, who submitted to this slavery 12 years, and so long they continued to pay their tribute. But on the 13th year they rebelled, and then the army of the Assyrians came upon them, under their commanders Amphro, Archel, and Chedorlaomer, and Tidal. These kings had laid waste all Syria, and overthrown the offsprings of the giants. And when they were come over against Sodom, they pitched their camp at the vale called the slime pits. For at that time there were pits in that place. But now, upon the destruction of the city of Sodom, that vale became like Lake Asphaltus, as it is called. However, concerning this lake, we shall speak more presently. Now, when the Sodomites joined battle with the Assyrians, and the fight was very obstinate, many of them were killed, and the rest were carried slaves, among which slaves was Lot, who had come to assist the Sodomites. All right. hmm when Abraham heard of their calamity, he was at once afraid for Lot and his brothers and sisters, and pitied the Sodomites, his friends and his neighbors, and thinking it proper to afford them help. He did not delay it, but marched quickly, and the fifth night fell upon the Assyrians near Dan, for that is the name of the spring of Jordan. And before they could arm themselves, he slew some as they were in their beds, before they could suspect any harm, and others who were not yet gone asleep, but were so drunk they could not fight, and ran away. Abraham chased after them till on the second day he drove them in a body unto Hobah, a place belonging to Damascus, and thereby demonstrated that victory does not depend on the crowd, the size, and the number of hands, but the alacrity and courage of soldiers, overcame the most numerous bodies of men, while he got the victory over so great an army, with no more than 318 of his servants and 3 of his friends. But all those that fled returned home ingurgiously. So Abram, when he had saved the captive, the slaves, Sodomites, who had been taken by the Assyrians, and Lot also his kinsman, returned home in peace. Now the king of Sodom met him at a certain place which they called the King's Plain, where Melchizedek, king of the city Salem, received him. That name signifies the righteous king, and such he was without dispute, and so much that on this record he was made the priest of the Most High. However, they afterward called Salem Jerusalem. Now this Melchizedek supplied Abram's army in a hospitable manner, and gave him provisions in abundance. And as they were feasting, he began to praise him and to bless the Most High for subduing his enemies under him. And when Abram gave him the tenth part of his prey, he accepted of the gift. But the king of Sodom desired Abram to take the prey, but asked that he might have those men restored to him whom Abram had saved from the Assyrians, because they belonged to him. But Abram would not do so, nor would he make any other advantage of that prey than what his servants had eaten, but still insisted that he should afford a part to his friends and that had assisted him in the battle. The first of them, which was called Ishah, and then Ener and Mamre. And the Most High commended his virtue, and said, You shall not, however, lose the rewards you have deserved to receive by such your glorious actions. He answered, And what advantage will it be to me to have such rewards when I have none to enjoy them after me? For he was hereto childless, and the Most High promised that he should have a son, and that his prosperity, his children, should be very numerous, and so much numerous that their number should be like the stars. When he heard that, he offered a gift to the Most High. He offered the sacrifice to the Most High Yah, as he commanded him. The manner of the sacrifice was this: he took a heifer, a cow of 3 years old, and a she goat of 3 years old, and a ram like in the same way of 3 years old, and a turtle dove, and a pigeon. Hmm. Uh, uh, and as he was enjoined he divided the three former, but the birds he did not divide. There's a note. It is worth noting here that the Most High required no other sacrifice under the law of Moses than what were taken from these five kinds of animals, which he here required of Abram. And nor did the Jews feed upon any other domestic animals than the three here named, as Reland observes on Antiquity 4, 5, and 3. Um, Book 4, Chapter 5, verse or paragraph 3. After which, before he built his altar, where the birds of prey flew about, as desirous of blood, a divine voice came to him, Abram, declaring that their neighbors would be grievous to his children, prosperity, when they should be in Egypt for 400 years. All right. As to this affliction of Abram's prosperity for 40 years, see Antiquities 2, 9, and 1. During which time they should be afflicted, but afterwards should overcome their enemies, and should conquer the Canaanites in war, and possess themselves of their land and of their cities. All right now. All right. Hmm. That's interesting. I should go to that Antiquities 2, 9, and 1. That's interesting. But yeah, um, just sharing a little bit on Nimrod, Abram, and all the things that they go through. Um, but it's definitely history talked about these things. Like I said, I was reading out of the Josephus there. Mm. Let me just look at this if I can find it. Mm. It said 2, chapter 9, verse 1. That's interesting. 2, 9, and 1. Hmm. Now it happened that the Egyptians grew delicate and lazy as to the painstaking and gave themselves up to other pleasures, and in particular to the love of gain. They also became very ill affected towards the Hebrews, as touched with envy at their prosperity. For when they saw how the nation of the Israelites grew and were become eminent, already in plenty of wealth, that which they had acquired by the virtue and nature, and I'm sorry, the virtue and natural love of labor, that they thought their increase was to their own detriment, and having in length of time forgotten the benefits they had received from Joseph, particularly the crown, being now come into another family, they became very abusive to the Israelites and contrived many ways of afflicting them. For they enjoined them to cut a great number of channels for the river, and to build walls for their cities and ramparts, that they might restrain the river and hinder the waters from stagnating upon its running over its own banks. They set them also to build pyramids. What? What was this? There's a note. Let me read it. Of this building of the pyramids of Egypt by the Israelites, see Presonius Orge and Egyptic chapter 21. It is not impossible they might build one or more of the small ones, but the large ones seem much later. Only if they be all built of stone, this does not so well agree with the Israelites' labors. which are said to have been in brick and not in stone, as Mr. Sandys observes in his travels, pages 127 and 28. Mm, mm. That's interesting there too. But let's get to that. Let's get to that affliction thing real quick. That's what I'm reading this for. All right. So, uh, okay, and they set them also to build pyramids, and by all this wore them out, and forced them to learn all sorts of mechanical arts, and to accustom themselves to hard labor. And 400 years did they spend under these afflictions, and for they strove one against the other, which should get the mastery, and the Egyptians desiring to destroy the Israelites by these works, and the Israelites desiring to hold out to the end under them. Is Israel a homeborn slave? That's interesting right there. Mm, mm, mm. Mm, 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 mm. Um, this is interesting. I'm glad I went over here. There's some more on this. Where is that star at? They don't have the star nowhere on this page. Okay, so this note, I don't know where this note goes because I can't see the star right now, but it says, as to the affliction of Abram's prosperity for 40 years, see antiquities of the Jews, and that's what I was reading. 1:10 and 3. And as to what cities, so that's book 1, chapter 10, paragraph 3. And as to what cities they built in Egypt under Pharaoh Sosotris, and of Pharaoh Sosotris drowning in the Red Sea. See essay on the Old Testament appended, page 132 and 62. All right. Okay, so that's some interesting stuff there. All right. While the affairs of the Hebrews were in this condition, a particular occasion offered itself to the Egyptians, which made them more solicitous for the extinction of our nation. One of those sacred scribes, one of them sacred scribes who were very sages in foretelling future events, truly told the king that about this time there would be a child born to the Israelites who, if were reared, would bring the Egyptian dominion low and would raise the Israelites, that he would excel all men in virtue and obtain a glory that would be remembered throughout all ages, throughout all times. All right. So there's a note. Dr. Bernard informs us here that instead of the single priest or prophet of the Egyptians without a name in Josephus, the Targum of Jonathan names the two famous antagonists of Moses and Jannes and Jambres, nor is it at all unlikely that it might be one of these who for, foreboded so much misery to the Egyptians and so much happiness to the Israelites from the rearing of Moses. All right. Okay. So we know that it was Moses that was talked about. Janus or Jambres, we don't know. Um, which thing was so feared by the king that according to this man's opinion he commanded that they should cast every male child which was born to the Israelites into the river and destroy it, that besides this the Egyptian midwives should watch the labors of the Hebrew women and observe what is born, for these were the women who were enjoined to do the office of midwives. And there's a note there. It said Josephus is clear that these midwives were Egyptians and not Israelites, as in other copies, which is very probable. It being not easily to be supposed that Pharaoh could trust the Israelite midwives to execute so barbarous a command against their own nation. Consult therefore and correct hence our ordinary copies, Exodus 1:15 and 22. And indeed, Josephus seems to have had much completer copies of the Pentateuch or other authentic records now lost about the birth and actions of Moses than either our Hebrew, Samaritan, or Greek Bibles afford us, which enabled him to be so large and particular about him. Hmm. Um, so he asked to do the office of the midwives, where hmm, um, to them, and by reason of their relation to the king, would not sin or break his commandments. He asked also that if any parents should disobey him and venture to save their male children alive, that they and their family should be destroyed. Okay. This was a severe affliction indeed to those that suffered it, and not only as they were deprived of their sons, and while they were the parents themselves, they were asked to be subservient to the destruction of their own children, but as it was to be supposed to tend to the expiration, uh, uh, extirpation of their nation, while upon the destruction of their children and their own gradual dissolution, the calamity would become very hard and inconsolable to them. And this was the ill state that they were in. But no one can be too hard for the purpose of the Most High, though he contrived 10,000 subtle devices for that end. For this child whom the sacred scribe foretold was brought up and hid from the observers appointed by the king, and he that foretold him did not mistake in the consequence of his preservation, which were brought to pass after the manner following. Mm. Of this grandfather of Sostres, Ramses the Great, he slew the Israelite infants, and of the inscription on his obelisk containing, in my opinion, one of the oldest records of mankind. Mm. Mm. A man whose name was Abram, one of the nobler sorts of the Hebrews, was afraid for his whole nation if it should fail by the want of young men to be brought up hereafter, and was very uneasy at it, his wife being then with child, and he knew not what to do. Hereupon he betook himself to pray to the Most High, and asked him to have compassion on those men who had no wise transgressed the laws of his worship, and to afford them deliverance from the miseries they at that time endured, and to render abortive their enemies' hopes of the destruction of their nation. Accordingly, the Most High had mercy on him, and was moved by his prayers. He stood by him in his sleep, and encouraged him not to despair of his future favorites. Um, he said further that he did not forget their respect towards him, and he would always reward them for it. As he had formerly granted his favor to their forefathers, he made them increase from a few to a great multitude. He put him in mind that when Abraham was come alone out of Mesopotamia and Canaan, he had been made happy, not only in other respects, but that when his wife was at first barren, she was afterwards by him enabled to conceive seed and bear him sons, that he left to Ishmael and to his posterity the country of Arabia, and also to his sons by Keturah and Troglodytis, and to Isaac Canaan. By my assistance, said he did great exploits in war, which unless you be yourselves impious, you must still remember. As for Jacob, he became well known to strangers also by the greatness of his prosperity in which he lived, and left to his sons. He came into Egypt with no more than 70 souls, while you are now become about 600,000. Know therefore that I shall provide for you all in common what is for your good, and particularly for thyself, what shall make you famous. For the child out of dread of whose nativity the Egyptians have doomed the Israelite children to destruction shall be this child of yours, and shall be concealed, hid from those who watch to destroy him. And when he is brought up in surprising way, he shall deliver the Hebrew nation from the distress they are under from the Egyptians. His memory shall be famous while the world lasts. And this not only among the Hebrews, but foreigners also, all which shall be the effect of my favor to you and to your children. He shall also have such a brother that he shall himself obtain my priesthood, and his children shall have it after him to the end of the world. When the vision had informed him of these things, Abram awaked and told it to Jochebed, who was his wife. And now the fear increased upon them on the reason of the prediction in Abram's dream, for they were under concern, not only for the child, but for the reason of the great happiness that was to come to him also. However, the mother's labor was such as afforded a confirmation to what was foretold by the Most High, for it was not known to those that watched her by the easiness of her pains, and because the throes of her delivery did not fall upon her with violence. And now they nourished the child at home privately for 3 months. But after that time, Abram, fearing he should be discovered, and by falling under the king's displeasure, both he and his child should die, and so should he make the promise of God of no effect, he determined rather to entrust the safety and care of the child to the Most High, than to depend on his own concealment of him, which he looked upon as a thing of uncertain, and whereby both the child so privately to be nourished and himself should be in an imminent danger. But he believed that the Most High would some way for certain procure the safety of the child in order to secure the truth of his own predictions. When they had then determined, they made an ark of bulrushes after the manner of a cradle, and of a bigness sufficient for an infant to be laid in, without being too strained. They then daubed it over with slime, which would naturally keep out the water from entering between the bulrushes, and put the baby into it, and setting it afloat upon the river, they left its preservation to the Most High, its care, to the river received to the river, and received the child and carried him along. But Miriam, the child's sister, passed along upon the bank over against him, as her mother had bid her, to see whether the ark would be carried, where God demonstrated that human wisdom was nothing, but that the Supreme Being is able to do whatsoever he pleases, that those who, in order to their own security, condemn others to destruction, and use great endeavors about it, about it, and fail of their purpose, but that others are in a surprising manner saved, and obtain a prosperous condition almost from the very midst of their calamities. Those, I mean, whose dangers arise by the appointment of the Most High, and indeed such as providence care was exercised in the case of this child, as showed the power of the Most High. Yeah. All right. Shalom.